So now I'm going to pass off the proverbial mic to Igor, who will give us an introduction to our speaker, Melissa DeWitt.
All right. Hi, everyone. So Melissa is an instructional designer for the College of Professional Studies. She designs, develops, and manages course projects for multiple programs across various modalities. The end goal of her work is to craft innovative and engaging learning experiences for diverse student populations. She has teaching experience that spans several subjects, including information literacy, instructional design, writing and composition, and research methods. She uses a student-centered and care ethics-based approach so students feel comfortable expressing who they are, making mistakes, learning, and interacting with new people. So, Melissa, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me as part of your brown bag series, especially your first one. No pressure to make it a good one and to kick off your semester here. We will be talking about discussion boards, but actually mostly joy today. And before I kick it off, a little bit of housekeeping. I will ask you for a couple of participatory things starting here. If you are so inclined to share what is bringing you joy this week, whether that is a word, a GIF, an emoji, or anything along those lines, feel free to share that in the chat. Periodically throughout the presentation, I will have activities where I might ask you to share in the chat, do a Padlet, things like that. I will not put you in breakout rooms. I will not ask you to unmute or talk to each other if you do not want to do that. You don't ever have to unmute if you don't want to, though when I do ask for participation, you are also welcome to do that. So if you are worried that I'm going to force you to do a lot of things on Friday, I will not. One word in a chat is great, again, if you're so inclined. So before we kick into it, we already had my introduction. I do want to mention as well, we are on the quarter system at the College of Professional Studies. And so we have not started, but I will be teaching in fall as well. I will be teaching our undergraduate culminating project course. So I've been thinking a lot about discussion boards and interactive ways of engaging with my class. My context is that I primarily teach online asynchronous classes. And so when I think about student engagement and student interaction, and also bringing joy into the classroom, I think a lot about how I can do that without ever seeing or meeting or ever talking to any of my students, because they're all over the place. They're various age ranges, but I may never even see a picture of them. And so what ways can we engage? Can we still have joyous discussion and relationships despite an asynchronous, I guess, barrier or challenge? So kicking it off strong, when you all hear the term discussion board, what comes to mind for you? Please feel free to post one word or a thought about discussion board. Grown, absolutely. That's like the first thing. You're just like, ugh, discussion board, busy work, boring, redundant, stagnant, unmet potential. I love how optimistic that one is. That's why we're here today. Insufficient, repetitive. Yeah. I noticed that no one said joy as part of the word. It's not really the first thing that we associate with a discussion board whatsoever. They can feel robotic, right? It could feel like checking off some boxes for students. There's boring. They're a space where we're supposed to come together and chat, but is there any real community that's actually happening in there? Or are we just posting to the prompt, post once, reply twice, I got a grade, let's get out of here. That is also, I think, right across the board, every time I've talked to anyone about discussion boards, how we feel about them. And it's not undeserved. I am here, though, to be contradictory. I'm here to argue that the discussion boards can be fun. They can be sites of joy. what I am going to talk about is the intentional design and how that can actually facilitate and foster potentially joyous discussions. Also, things like the instructor's presence and facilitation. And overall, I really want to reimagine the discussion as a space for joyous learning and connection, rather than all of those negative associations or connotations we have with discussion boards. And so here's just a brief outline of what we're going to cover today. One, I'm going to start by talking about joy in education and some definitions that I'm working with to form a basis for this presentation. We will collaborate together on characteristics of joyous discussion prompts. We will do that by playing a game, again, short, and I won't ask you to talk. We'll also discuss other ways to find joy in discussion boards outside of making the prompts themselves, and then end with joyous discussion prompt examples. Okay, so I'm going to start by defining joy in education. Right, we started this presentation by sharing how we feel, and specifically how we feel about discussion boards. And what tends to emerge in conversations is all of the things that discussion boards are not. They're not joyous, they're not sites of connection. But weirdly, I want to situate our definition of joy and what it looks like in the online classroom within some of those negative emotions. So joy is not our current understanding of discussion boards. Joy is not boring, right? Joy is not rigid, superficial, or formulaic. That might mean to some that joy is not academia, where we have very ingrained norms, where we do things like value rigor or maybe devalue emotion, more so than valuing things like rigor or the learning as part of that. And so that would tell us that joy is situated in the opposite, right? Joy is exciting. It's flexible, it's deep, it's original. It's an emotion that we all feel, and we know when we feel it. We know when we're experiencing joy. So how do we reconcile joy with higher education, with online discussion? And for a lot of this presentation, I'm going to be pulling from the book Joy-Centered Pedagogy in Higher Education by Canfield in 2025, which talks about joy and the pedagogy of joy as a way to promote intellectual vigor and disrupt traditional notions of rigor that suggest learning should hurt. And in order to allow joy to flourish in higher education, we have to intentionally design our classrooms and our discussion boards in a way that does allow joy to flourish. And so going into some of the definitions highlighted in the book and in some of the chapters that other authors contributed to, joy starting off as egalitarian, meaning we are all experts in our own joy. Joy is relational, which means that joy in a classroom is dependence on humans in that classroom, including their diverse identities and, quote, the disposition, attitudes, and the mindset of the teacher. At its core, one definition argues that joy is the invisible activator of community. So not something that is simply fluffy or about feeling good, but as a tough fiber that binds the community together. So as a really important element to having community in the first place. Canfield also talks about joy as a resistance to dread, burnout, and disengagement. Joy allows us to imagine more helpful and more hopeful futures. And then I made sure to sound really serious so far, which feels like antithetical to joy in the first place. But going back to the emotional component, joy is about play and laughing and feeling the positive effects that play can bring as well, such as stress reduction and positive thinking. And then lastly, joy is a pedagogical renewable resource, so one that can regenerate itself as quickly as it's depleted. So an authentic, embodied, connective state of uplift that educators can intentionally cultivate in their classrooms to activate for students a sense of mattering, resilience, and agentic engagement. So something that we can renew and come up with over and over again that has positive impacts for our students. So thinking about those definitions of joy, I want to briefly touch on what are some things that can get in the way of joy, especially in education. Mason and Rodriguez, in their chapter on choosing joy over dread, highlight some common missteps to enacting joy in education. They first talk about how rigor is highly valued in higher education, but we don't spend a lot of time defining what rigor means. Sometimes it can be conflated with exclusionary or inaccessible practices. And so by that, that might mean things like really long readings or timed exams or rigid attendance policies, losing points for incorrect formatting, etc., were some of the examples that were given. So approximations of what constitutes as rigor and also the idea that maybe learning should hurt a little bit can get in the way of joy. There's also the idea that measuring learning with outcomes is the only way to build or find value in a course. I'm an instructional designer. I talk about outcomes literally all the time. We talk about measuring outcomes. So that is still to an extent important, but there's an idea that things like joy or emotion, we can't measure them, and so it isn't valuable for assessment. And if you can't measure or assess it, then maybe it doesn't have any value in the classroom, which is something I definitely want to push back on. Because Canfield asks, how did we come to such a place where our most treasured experiences have no currency or academic credibility? To what extent can joy be in the classroom, even if we can't measure or outcome it? We'll outcome as a verb. So lastly, a lack of time and space to build community and relationships is cited as a barrier to joy in education. So rather than taking the time to get to know one another, to experience culture and community, or to share stories and foster trust, we're sometimes focused on getting through content, right? Which we have limited time, we have limited ability to connect with students. And so getting through the content can be heavily prioritized, and students are paying for learning and are there to learn and get a degree. So that makes sense. But does that mean we have to sacrifice things like community and relationships in order to just get through content? Moving in then to joyful strategies, right? We've talked about definitions of joy, what might get into the way of them in an education context. I want to talk about strategies then to infuse joy more broadly, especially in an asynchronous context. One thing that comes up over and over and over again, especially in online education, is the idea of an instructor's social presence. So this is the idea that the instructor not only participates in a class, but is also someone who feels real and human in the online space. If we can accept the definition of joy, that joy is relational, then the instructor is a huge factor in creating joy in the classroom. They make the space, they can create a positive environment through their interactions, policies, and overall presence. This includes things such as the ability to handle technology, having clear instructions, being readily available, having varied tasks in a course, and intentionally creating playful elements in a class as well. So outside of instructor social presence and the ability to create a feeling of social presence, the Universal Design for Learning, or UDL guidelines, do actually include joy under designing multiple means of engagement by designing options for welcoming interests and identities. So that's on the CAST website from 2024. This description in the guidelines states that learning environments that spark joy and opportunities for play are central to learning. They cite cognitive benefits such as sparking curiosity, that it can enhance engagement, build relationships, and serve as an act of resistance, especially for marginalized learners. Tucker Smith, who helped create these guidelines, talked about the research that went into creating them and found that there are 5 ways to experience joy in learning, which included adding a variety of forms of play, creating opportunities to discover and explore through materials, connecting the classroom content back to one's own identity, such as reading through a book with a protagonist that shares your background, and then also engaging in work with peers and having the opportunity to share understanding and knowledge with others, which can include storytelling. So that's a little bit about what's happening in the UDL guidelines. If that's something that you're looking at as you design your classes, activities, and discussion spaces as well. Lastly, I do a lot of research and yapping about infusing care ethics into an online classroom. That's a huge area of interest in research area of mine. And part of that work emphasizes the importance of relationships, especially in an online classroom and especially in an asynchronous classroom. So if we think about online spaces, you don't have organic opportunities to have side conversations, go off topic, make like a quick joke in conversation, go outside. So if you want to form relationships and emphasize play, you have to intentionally build that into an online space. It's not organically going to appear without intentional effort and sort of design. I strongly believe that discussions are a great space that we can actually do this in, but we have to let go of our rigorous standards that value content, outcomes, and rigidity, and instead build the time and space to make connection in discussion boards, so that that is also a space where relationships and joy can flourish outside of any sort of ideas of what we think the discussion space has to be. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second and take a drink. I am finished talking at you for a second. We are going to move into a collaboration piece. Oops, spoilers. I want to play a game. In the Joyful Pedagogy book that I keep citing, the author suggests asking if classroom policies and practices spark joy, right? In reference to Mary Kondo's 2014 book. In a riff on her idea, in the book, they contend that courses are sometimes overfull, weighted down with content that we might feel to cover, and not always coherently designed. And so I want to also kind of play along those lines and talk about what in a discussion board may or may not spark joy for us too. Before I get into this, one last thing I do want to do before we move into the game, I do want to quickly define what I mean by discussion board. Before, and I found that a lot of us might come in with like, oh, this is what a discussion is, this is what an assignment is, and those are really rigid guidelines. And so for me and for where I'm coming from, a discussion board is more about the function or what that space allows me to do. It doesn't have a specific prompt structure. It doesn't have to be limited to a single question. For me, a discussion board is simply the method I'm using to have students. We use Canvas, and so that is one spot where I think about that is in our LMS. A discussion board involves some sort of interaction between students. So students can post, they can be seen publicly, and they can all respond to one another. So when I'm going into these prompts and I'm talking about some of these features and we're collaborating on ideas, I do invite you to let go of any ideas you have of what a discussion board is supposed to be or what it has to be, and instead think more about the functionality of that discussion space to connect students to one another and to share ideas, rather than the prompts that we tend to infuse on top of it. Okay, so really the game. In this game, we are going to play Does This Discussion Prompt Spark Joy? I'm going to share an example discussion prompt, and for each prompt, you have a simple task. Think yes or no. Does anything about this spark joy? As we go through the game, I also ask that you think about why you're responding the way you're responding, because after this, we're going to compile some of the characteristics we noted or that we've thought about in the past or think about doing in the future and compile those together in Padlet. Don't worry about that too much. I will definitely go into that. For this game, go with your heart. I'll explain the next steps of the Padlet after the game. I'm also going to show you each prompt on the screen, but I do have a document you can reference if that is easier to read. The reason being, and as a warning, some of these are very long, and I will read them to you, and I apologize in advance. It turns out when I was finding Joy's discussion in examples or non-examples, sometimes the length is kind of part of it too, in order to really get to what we're trying to do. So for each of these, I'll read through it. In the chat, yes or no, is this sparking joy? If you want to go further and say why, what about this might be sparking joy, or your initial gut reactions, if it's, again, just like exaggerated groans, that's also fine as we go through this. All right. Okay. We are going to start with our first prompt. Going to briefly read through this. So revisit the following article, and then it links to the article. Then select one concept from the article to research further. In a 450 to 500 word post, address the following. Should the concept you discuss be adapted locally or standardized across cultures? What culture-based skills would HR professionals need? Provide at least 2 additional links and resources that others can reference. Be sure to appropriately cite external resources from your research to support your points. Your initial post should generally range between 4 to 5 paragraphs or 300 to 700 words. Responses to classmate posts should be at least 150 words. You must follow college and Turabian citation style formatting for your post. Did that spark joy? No joy. Oh yeah, heads up, we use Turabian. Who does that? Just us. You think we're the last people in the world to use Turabian. So if you see Turabian, that doesn't spark joy for me ever. Just knows, especially in all caps. Feels like a research paper. Yeah, feels really long. Has a lot of requirements. Has a lot of Turabian. Some thumbs down. Okay, on to our next one. So prompt 2, land use themes often intersect with popular culture, influencing and reflecting societal attitudes and perceptions. So think about themes of urban development, conservation, community activism. Choose a film, TV show, or song that addresses a land use planning theme and just discuss some portrayal of those themes. How accurately does the media piece represent real world land use challenges? What messages or values? And then underneath, the instructor had added some of my favorite examples include Dr. Seuss's The Lorax, Disney's WALL-E, and the song Big Yellow Taxi, originally recorded by Joni Mitchell, and Aaron Brockovich. I see this sparks a little more joy. I would be excited to talk about Parks and Rec. Honestly, anytime I've gotten to work on an environmental class, especially land use classes, I too am like, can we sneak in Parks and Rec into this? Anything with songs or books is sparking joy. Perfect. Okay. So prompt number 3, we have, you're near the end of your research project. Hooray. You will soon submit your project and present information to your classmates. It's been a lot to process. You're almost finished. This week, we're going to use this discussion space to check into each other. First, how are you feeling about research, this class, your project, and the work you've completed? Please post a photo that conveys how you're feeling. It doesn't have to be a photo of you. It can be a picture you find online or one you take of your dog. Then discuss anything related to this class or your program. You lead the discussion. You can use these questions as a guide, but do not feel like you need to answer all of them or be limited. If you want to talk about something else or pose a question, feel free to do so. And the prompt questions are, is there anything you're struggling with where you'd like support? Do you have any tips or strategies? Is there anything cool or interesting to you that you want to share out? How do we feel about this prompt? We love it. Good mixture between chest and joy. I did see some like emojis fly too. That brings me joy when they fly across the screen. So thank you for doing that too. Yeah, it can be, maybe it's too broad or vague. So maybe they don't know what's being asked. So it could feel a little overwhelming. Values work that's been done feels relational. So mixed, right? Like some good. And so maybe areas that could be narrowed in or could overwhelm some, but feel joyous to others. Doesn't have to be a photo of you to not pressure students. In general, I invite any pictures of dogs, is my philosophy for discussion boards as well. So personalized and supportive. Okay, cool. So on to our fourth one. What is corporate sustainability? What 3 points did you take from the video? This is our shortest one. How does this make you feel? Does it spark joy? Just a boo. We are not feeling joyous about this one. No. Okay, cool. So vague that it may make students nervous. Yeah, just define corporate sustainability real fast, and then give me 3 points and we'll move on. And then I guess they'll discuss that. I'm not really sure. Okay. Tempting to offload to AI. I saw that prompt. I was tempted to offload it to AI too. So I feel that. So for our fifth prompt, you engage in argumentation every day, whether you realize it or not. In this discussion, you'll engage in an informal argument and move closer towards formalizing your argument with evidence. So it's separated into initial post, choose one of the statements below and take a position for or against it. The position statements are cats are better than dogs. Artificial intelligence is dangerous. It's better to work in person than work remotely. It's better for the environment to have items delivered rather than to run errands to buy them. Watching sports is better than playing sports. So in your initial post, list the statement you've chosen and the position you're taking. Do you agree or disagree? Explain. What is your reasoning? For your initial post, you can simply share your thinking. Do not use outside resources at this point. And then your replies, it's time to argue. Choose a classmate's post to argue against. It does not have to be the same argument you chose. You're going to respond directly to their argument, but this time you will use evidence to defend your position. How does this one make us feel as a discussion prompt? Thumbs down. We don't want to do it. There's a lot of steps. Whoop. Oh my gosh, sorry. I keep scrolling through too fast. This is the downside of a roller on top of your mouse. Any other feelings? I see a thumbs up. I see a thumbs down. This one might like incite contradictory feelings, which is fine too. Would want some guardrails. Can get testy. Yeah. So might depend on the environment. So like maybe as a starting point, but maybe needs to be built out or kind of guarded a little more. Maybe may work best in person. Yeah, that is all good thoughts about that one too. Okay, this should be our last one. And thank you for participating so far. I really appreciate it. Okay, so prompt 6. Read the 3 definitions of organization development in chapter 1 and locate at least one additional definition in any publication or online source. Share the link with us. Compare and contrast these 4 definitions. With which do you agree and why? Based on your answer, write your own definition of organization development that you could use with a colleague or client. How does your definition differ from the above? Does this spark joy? Also, apologies. I didn't read that in a joyous tone either, and I do not mean to influence it. But that is how that one made me feel, and I'll just be transparent. Susan, thumbs down. I figured out joyous tone, Susan. I hated reading it. I also, there's so many definitions. I'm like, how many definitions do I have to find is like actually where I got in this. These are all real examples, by the way. I did pull these from various places, some that I have created. I won't tell you which ones, good or bad, but some that we've adapted or used to be in classes and have replaced. Unnecessary to have discussion just for definitions. I feel that in my soul. Okay. So thank you again for participating in my game and listening to me ramble about these very long prompts. I apologize. They're just all long. I could not find short ones. But what I want us to do for this next piece is I want everyone to think about how they responded to the different prompts, right? Good or bad, conflicted, or starting points, potential things like that. And consider, right, which ones sparked joy.
But I mean, we lowered things, so if I just like maybe up it and I can stay with them, maybe it'll be okay.
Okay. I mean, you could definitely help us get like back in there and all that good stuff, but with like for
somebody is.
Can she help us like get him on the table? He obviously does really comfortable.
Okay. Just a little side quest there for a second. No big deal. So as we are thinking through some of those, we are going to collaborate on a list, and I've made a discussion. Or sorry, I haven't made a discussion. Surprise, we've been having a chat the whole time. I've made a Padlet that we can use to collect characteristics. So I had put in that tiny URL if you want to go back to any of those discussion prompts and think about what were some of the things that were causing me to spark joy or not spark joy. Where was I conflicted? Where was I not? I've shared in the chat the Padlet, and I'll pull that up on the screen in a second. But in this Padlet, essentially what I'm asking you to do is reflect on what are those things and what are those feelings that came up. And based on that, what am I feeling like are characteristics of a joyful discussion board? What was really making me feel like positive or was kind of sparking that? And you can think beyond these prompts too. If you have experiences with discussions you've created that were really joyful, feel free to pull on those. Or if you participated in ones that are not. We're going to collect joyful characteristics, joyless characteristics. What are the things that are making discussion boards feel tedious and impersonal and robotic? And then I had a third category for like, I don't know, I've got a thought, I don't know where it goes. Feel free to stick that in that category there. So I will stop sharing for 1 second and I'll move over to the Padlet. I'll give us just a few minutes to reflect and add to this Padlet. And then we'll come back together and talk through some of these, see some of the themes that are coming up for us of what is making us feel joy for discussion versus not. So let's take maybe just 3 to 4 minutes and then I'll be right back with you. Also, please tell me if the Padlet doesn't work. Okay, it looks like it is. Good. Sometimes tech betrays me. So thank you for participating. So go ahead and keep contributing to the Padlet. I just wanted to highlight some of the things I'm seeing. Thank you again so much for participating. You have amazing thoughts and amazing characteristics that are being brought together here that we can kind of look to maybe when we're constructing our own discussions. I had mentioned I'd done this previously. I reference that Padlet sometimes to be like, okay, lock in. Like, what's a good discussion prompt based on our collaboration? But I'm seeing a couple trends coming up too. I saw encouragement. I see things involving personal real world connection, connections to events, to media that are coming up repeatedly, stuff about spontaneity, things that benefit students. But yeah, a lot of like the applicable real life application, pop culture, perfect personal references. I like the addition too of it requires people to discuss something. Like there's something to actually talk about. I think is a great criteria for discussion. Maybe my number one, in fact. Awesome application, fun and creative. I'm glad post a dog picture. Again, always post a dog picture for me in a discussion, whether it's relevant or not. I am never picky in my classroom. And then that leads us to the joy list. Again, that's me personally, by the way. If you are anti-dog or pro-cat or something else, please do you. I'm not here to rain on anyone's parade for that either. But going into Joyless, it seems like instructor generated, APA style. Turabian is my personal. Oh, is there a dog on screen? Easily described. Thank you so much for sharing your dog, Julie. I am easily distracted, but that's like my favorite kind. But other Joyless characteristics, hefty word minimums, lots of instruction with things getting lost, too many activities, regurgitating content. When it's so short, it feels like a trick. Actually, that stresses me out too, because I put in the one short prompt and then I was like, wait, is that all of it? And it was. And it feels like it was tricking me too. So no one knows the pointer, how it benefits. It's just there on the screen. And I'm like, it's okay. Not creative, things like that. And then what I like in the I don't know how to classify section is folks have started talking about peer responses, which is a great segue into what I want to talk about next, because I've only talked about prompting to this point. But right, like how do we then incite or think about joy within the actual discussion space that's happening and not just in our creation of the prompt, which will lead me back over to my slides. If you had anything else you wanted to add to this Padlet too, please absolutely feel free to do that at any point if you think of something new, or check it in the chat. I am not picky either way about how you'd like to engage. So I just mentioned focused a lot on intentional prompts or spaces. I want to briefly touch on other aspects of discussion that could be used to spark some more joy. And where we can find those within a discussion. Let's talk about replies. And I'll start by posing some hypothetical questions. And you can determine, right, like based on your own pedagogical preferences or teaching style too. Can students get off topic or explore tangents in a discussion? Or does that impact their grade? That's a question that I ask myself all the time. And I think based on how you saw me just immediately go dog, you might know where I stand on that. Because I think a way that we can consider sparking unexpected joy in a discussion is by being more lenient in the replies, or at least modeling a more relaxed approach on occasion where it benefits that. So as an example, I made a video, I make an intro video in my classes, and in it, I talk about myself and what I like. And I love reality TV. I love Survivor. Talk about that every time I make a video for my intros to classes. And so I was replying in a discussion thread that was focused on a topic, focused on the comments. And a student started asking me about television. And we went into a totally separate side thread about the shows that we liked and talking more about Survivor and things like that. This is something that happens all the time in person when I teach. Again, because I'm great at getting off topic, but also because it's something that I think happens organically, like I mentioned earlier, of like before and after class students are staying, or you have a down period. And so someone's asking you questions to further relationships and community. And it doesn't really usually happen in an online asynchronous discussion space. But for me, it was a delight. It meant that the student, for one, watched my video, which is wild, and also felt that I had some sort of social presence. And two, they felt like they could ask me about that in this academic discussion space, even though it was unrelated, which to me meant that I was helping facilitate a space where that was allowed, right? Like they still did all of their work. They felt like they could do an aside. And that's really important to me personally, is creating spaces where people feel like they can do that and can be themselves too. So I've had students who were totally on topic, but were able to respond to the discussion with a story or an aside that was very personal to them. They were pulling on their own experiences. And I've had students who are like really, really funny in discussions if you let them be. So a thing that I think can happen in replies is, in what ways can we allow or make space for people to be who they are and to express who they are personally? Is a consideration that I continue to have, and also a question I continue to seek ways to answer as well. Another aspect of joy I haven't explored in the presentation is the personal joy we might get out of teaching or seeing learning happen. If we're all educators, we're here for a reason. And I think to some degree, teaching brings us joy and seeing learning brings us joy. I've had discussion prompts that aren't on their surface super exciting, but it was a way where students can actually learn and engage in the content. For example, I've used the prompt about sharing how students feel about research and having open discussion a ton in like a couple different formats. And what generally emerges are things that I don't expect, like someone saying they've shared their learning with their team at work and they're using it to change their processes. Or I had a student talk about how they've reconsidered how education can be redone as a result of the class and cited examples of things that were like changing their mind and things like that. I think it's really joyful for me personally, and I hope for students too, to see students make those connections and really get it and be offered a space where we can see that happen. That again may not happen organically, but if it's designed in a space where you can see that happen, it can be a delight. And then the last thing is using the discussion space to make connections. I think I've said this like 1,000 times, so I'll just say it one more time. When I teach and participate in discussions, sometimes I'll see things like commonalities between posts that students may not be able to get if they don't see the reply. I think Canvas is the worst because the discussion function doesn't alert you that someone's replied to you. It doesn't like thread very well. I don't know, I have like 10 gripes about it. But one thing that has been nice is you can tag students and that does actually alert them. So I can tag 2 or 3 students and make a post and say, hey, you both posted about this. Here's what I see in common. You two should connect, or can you expand more? Or maybe you should talk about this. And please read each other's stuff. You have like these interesting insights that bounce off each other. So we see this as a more active way and an intentional way to facilitate a relationship in the discussion itself, is helping students make those connections or tagging them or pulling them together in ways that maybe wouldn't, again, happen organically if I wasn't trying to do that. And then this is the last section, just to sort of conclude and round out and echo some things you've shared and maybe share just a few more insights. I'll share just a few more examples of discussion types that can be used to create joyful discussions. And so these are some ideas. If you have more, please feel free to share them in the chat as I go through. If you're like, I've done this in a discussion and I had some great joy, or I'm thinking of doing this, or definitely don't do this. It was the worst discussion I've ever created, which I can say confidently about several I've done. So sometimes we learn. But some ideas. We have student letter generated discussions. So if we're talking about applying things to personal context, or connecting it to what students enjoy, basically creating a space where students take the lead and talk about what's important to them can lead to richer discussion and topics you didn't expect. You can provide prompts that say like, hey, you should choose one of the themes from the readings and generate a question, or like give starting prompts too. It doesn't have to be totally unstructured, but that can be a way to have students take the lead and start by prioritizing what they think is most important, rather than just creating a space and sort of driving the conversation yourself. I think there's room for both and all types, but that's one way to do it too. We already talked about anything that could involve play or creativity. I really like having them draw or make maps or express themselves in different ways outside of text. We have students do things like map their communities or how they receive and understand information. We've already talked about like sharing pictures, drawing emotions. I have a friend that asks students to draw their understanding of what a university is, which sparks really good discussion and is a really cool thing to do, especially with like first-year students. Another thing is anything where they can share who they are, such as pictures, bits of their personality. I like those for check-ins or ways of conveying emotional states. So you can quickly browse through too and just get a quick image check on how everyone is just doing in general in your class, in a way that maybe isn't as easy or conveyed as readily over text. Pop culture connections is another one that has already come up. My one caveat for pop culture, I love pop culture. I talk about it all the time. I've themed classes around it, but there is a risk of leaving students out if your pop culture references are so specific that they don't get them. I like don't consider myself old, but sometimes I share a reference and then nobody understands it. And I'm like, oh no, is this dated and ancient? Am I the ancient one now? So anyway, don't get yourself into an existential crisis, but you can still, if you invite a broad pop culture in, right? Like if it's sort of the example, connect to land use planning, then they can sort of bring in their pop culture context. Though I still love things like asking them to analyze a video scene, whether that's an assignment or some shorter discussion from like Friends or Parks and Rec, or we do a lot of leadership classes. So The Office is really popular for like, hey, what was terrible about this? Usually not good examples, but they can pull stuff out of that as well. So finding examples in pop culture, case studies, things like that. And then we didn't get into it a ton, but I do want to mention it. Breaking the mold of a typical discussion with like ed tech or web tools. So doing things like a whiteboard, I make them whiteboard all the time. I am a whiteboard fiend. We have Lucid Chart integrated in. And so doing things where they might like respond to a prompt and create sticky notes or draw and kind of compare with each other that way. We did Padlet in this presentation. I also love things like perusal or group annotation tools, I think are a good way to break up discussion, but still have discussion within the space as well. An example is we have a myth busting whiteboard in a class where students share a myth they've heard about research or writing, and then students can take those and try and bust those myths with evidence they found about why they may or may not actually be accurate. It's usually things like a thesis statement has to be this many words long, like that kind of stuff. And then lastly, games. I love a game. Games can be a way to shake things up. Role-playing scenarios are a personal favorite of mine as a discussion space thing to do. It was too long to share. And again, I shared long prompts, so this was way too long to share in our prompt game, but we had an instructor who created an environmental policy role play where students had to take a stance and then argue with one another as their character. I say argue loosely. They chose a character, they took a stance, and then in character responded to each other, which was really fun. I love watching that one all the time as it goes in the class. And then another instructional designer that works with me made an immersive board game. I've attended escape room sessions that can be done asynchronous. So lots of cool asynchronous games that you can get creative in the discussion space too, where they're doing things back and forth, but maybe not in the way we expect them. So in a second, I will open us up to questions, discussion, whatever we want to talk about in the last few minutes. So in the chat, feel free to share any other additional ideas you have, whether there's a prompt or something you want to try. And as you do that, I'll leave you with the same invitation that Canfield leaves us in their book, which is that we should choose vigor, which is affirming and uplifting over rigor, which replicates past practices without critical thought. And we think about how we can make our discussion spaces vigorous rather than simply rigorous. And so I will end there. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. You could have done anything today, and you decided to come to this. And I think that's awesome, and I really appreciate it. My contact info is there as well, or you can find me on LinkedIn. So please feel free to do so. I will open it up now if you have any questions, comments, points of discussion in our last few minutes. And thank you.
Yes, and before any questions, thank you, Melissa, for this really amazing presentation. I feel very uplifted. So thank you for your time being here with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's Friday. It's a good day for joy. And I see Julie has a hand raised.
Thank you, Melissa. I was curious about your experience with ungraded discussion boards that are just optional, whether it's during a certain week or throughout the whole semester. In what ways, if any, do those function in the joy realm of functions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I honestly pondered that a lot because I think about the balance between getting anyone to do anything, which sometimes is hard to do if there isn't some sort of incentive or point-based thing to kind of connect to that. But one thing that I have done is try to make ungraded discussions that are very relevant to something that's going on. So in like a research methods class, we have one that is just a running open discussion where if at any point in their research project they have a general question or a thing like that that they want to pose to the class, they can post it in there and they can also help each other. I link that in my announcements every week too. So it's not just like out in a void. Otherwise, I think they just won't ever remember it. And then sometimes I forget about it, quite honestly. So it intentionally makes us all remember that space exists. So I've personally liked having those for a purpose. I have not done a very good job at having ungraded discussions that are purely like for chatting. Mostly because I don't we've we have some that we've tried in the past that it hasn't worked. I just haven't found a way that it has worked for me personally. And I don't think that means they shouldn't be done or we shouldn't try them. I think it might depend on your students and context. I found lots of differences in grad versus undergrad too, where like grad students might engage with me in a different way than undergrads might. And so or like you might do something and then the next time you try it it's a different class and it like bombs. So I don't know. I guess the end story is I am not against it. I think it is worth experimentation and figuring out like what is working in your class in your context in your situation. That was a very long answer to like say that. So hopefully that helps too. And then I also have, what does your discussion board rubrics look like? We have a couple, we have a generic one that is one criteria that's like, hey, did you do the thing we asked you to do in the prompt? And then grade purely on that. And then if you were asked to do replies, did you do that in a way that was discussiony? It's like better worded than that as examples, but like instead of being like, hey, did you like, I agree with you, that is a great reply or whatever, did you like lead somewhere in the discussion, again kind of based on what the prompt is asking them to do. So it's pretty prompt based. We sometimes use ones that are more like reflection rubrics, so that it's prioritizing a reflective process rather than like doing the thing. It is dependent on the discussion, but in general, like, did you do the thing that I asked you to do, and did you like do it in a way that helps growth? is kind of how it's framed. What role does the joyful discussion board contribute to the total course grade is also a great question to think about too. Rubrics don't spark joy for me is like my first problem. Like every time I think about a rubric, I'm like, ugh. But what does the joyful discussion board contribute to the total course grade? I always think about like what percentage of a course grade do I want tied to like summative learning, right? Like to did they like get the outcomes of the class? Did they do the major assignments? But I had started over time putting more emphasis on what we call the class participation bucket, which is where like discussion boards, activities, things where they engage each other fall. Originally we were like, oh, that shouldn't be more than like 20% of the class. And then I was like, it should be like half the class probably, or like kind of whatever makes sense for that class. So for me, depending on like how the discussion board is functioning or what I'm trying to build in the class, it's more and more taken up a bigger percentage because I think I want to value that more. Also, on an aside, I dabble with ungrading all the time and like trying all sorts of wild methods of grading. So I am also all over the place on that, but I try and value any community relationship building and personally, while also trying to balance like, okay, but they like also have to do the class stuff. And I want to make sure that's properly taken care of and incentivized as well. I have wishy-washy answers to everything. I apologize. Any other questions or thoughts or things that are coming up for you? Yeah, Kirby.
Yes. I wanted to ask where like video discussion boards play into the realm of joy. Because I've had them before, and while I like them because like perfection kind of is thrown out the window, they're not the most accessible.
Yeah, that's a good question. Instead of being pure video, I have moved to more like having a choice. So having like you can do a video response, you could do audio, or you could respond with like an image. I try and give multiple options rather than pure video. We do have instructions. We use Kaltura as our video platform. So if they record through Kaltura, it'll at least auto caption and provide a transcript for all videos. So there's at least a baseline minimum. Even if it's robot captioned, it's still better than like just a video where who knows what's happening. You can't hear it, right? Like you can't really view it. So that has been the strategy of like, if you post a video, it has to at least meet these bare minimum. But personally, I have liked mixing video with like other options in case someone doesn't want to create a video or they can't for whatever reason, or they're better at conveying who they are and how they want to respond in some other format. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay. And I make videos all the time for my class, and they're messy and I don't redo them. So I also value that in some video response as well. Thank you all for your questions. Any other final thoughts? I know we're at time, so I again just really appreciate you all and happy to hang out for a few minutes if anyone has any further questions or thoughts, but otherwise I really appreciate your time and attention. And I hope you go forth and have a good semester and the most joyous discussions you've ever had.
Yes, and thank you again, Melissa, for your time. We're very grateful for you for kicking off this brown bag session for us for this fall.
Yeah, thanks for having me.